Hi, I'm Lionel Windsor, and this is my channel anyway, so you should know who I am. This is my colleague Dan Wu.
G'day, how's it going?
As you can see, we came in today at Moore College, and we've decided to wear the uniform of checked shirts.
Absolutely, got to keep up appearances.
Exactly, which is actually really good for video too, isn't it? Apparently, so yeah. I'm just experimenting with just trying to talk to my colleagues. We have great conversations amongst the faculty here at Moore College. We're in the kitchen at the moment, and I thought, well, I'm just experimenting with actually just having these conversations in front of a camera and sticking them up on my channel. So that's what we're doing. The particular conversation that we've started to have, and we thought it'd be really helpful to speak to people about now, is this kind of idea of isolation and God's love. And Dan, you preached a sermon in chapel yesterday on that topic. So I just wanted to sort of chat with you a little bit about it, and hopefully it can actually be helpful for thinking about the way in which we respond. Because I responded to it, and I thought it was a really helpful sermon, and I responded to it sort of directly by trying to do something to help people who are isolated and alone, which I can talk about a bit later. But first, I just want to ask you about, how did the sermon come about? Just tell us some history.
Yeah, well, it was actually quite an interesting situation. So obviously, Australia has been hit with a whole lot of restrictions due to coronavirus in a really kind of sudden and very quick way, in which a lot of people weren't expecting. And I think we weren't expecting the speed at which we'd have to make changes. And so as we thought about things like enforced isolation and those sorts of things, and as we thought about our campus in some ways closing down, we decided to shape the remainder of our chapel sermons around some responses, some gospel-shaped responses to the impact of coronavirus. And so we had, I think it was fear and Christian faith, death and Christian hope, and isolation and Christian love.
Excellent.
And,
can I just pause there for a moment? This is a random thing, but I've just realised that I just want to make sure that the audio is recording on this. So I'm just going to pause it, and then we're going to just re-record it and just cut it in. This is very high production values here.
We're off.
Yep, good. So the audio's working.
All right, we're back.
We're back. Yeah. Keep going.
So I was thinking about the passage that I was going to preach. That I had planned to preach anyway, which was Proverbs chapter 25. And the more that I thought about it, even though it wasn't the theme or the thrust of the passage or what I was going to preach, as I thought about the material in the chapter, I thought more and more actually it speaks to some of these issues quite powerfully. And so I decided to keep the chapter in Proverbs, but tailor it towards one of those particular topics, and that is isolation and Christian love. And because I just thought the chapter itself, when you sort of pause and think about it, initially it can seem like a random scattergun of just sayings, but it actually has a shape to it and a thrust to it, and that shape and thrust is highly relational. It really values people and values the connections between people. And so I thought that's a really helpful thing to draw people's attention to as we think about isolation.
Right, yeah. So it was actually sort of against, in some ways the passage is actually not speaking directly to the topic, it was actually speaking about the importance of connectedness.
Yeah, that's right.
At the start you made some important points about isolation and some of the effects of isolation. Do you want to just talk about those?
Well, I came across a whole raft of really interesting articles that were saying that one of the lesser focused on effects of coronavirus and the restrictions and people being in lockdown is that absence of human connection and activity and interaction is actually having quite a large and damaging effect on a lot of people. So one article that I read claimed that up to 40% of people in China, even though the effect of the virus itself is waning, there's a sort of a secondary wave of negative effects, and that is that the lack of connection has led to a high degree of anxiety and other health problems. And so the article cited as high as 40% now of people in directly affected areas in China are suffering anxiety due to continuing to be quarantined and not able to just get out and be amongst other people. And so they termed it a social recession, where our connectivity is actually we've got a deficit now, and it actually has a detrimental effect on each and every one of us.
Yeah, you listed some health effects too.
The article that I read tied to another article, which was talking just about loneliness, and it said that actually it's almost as if the desire to connect socially and the interconnections we have between us are kind of baked into us, and when we lack them, particularly for any extended period of time, it can have a sort of a stressing effect. So it actually raises your cortisol levels, apparently, and if you are under that kind of raised stress level for an extended period of time, it then has emotional and physiological effects. And so several things were cited in terms of anxiety and depression, but also even heart disease and other very tangible physical effects. And when you think about your experiences of loneliness, particularly prolonged loneliness, I think everyone can resonate that it does actually have a very heavy effect on your body, and if it continues on for a long time, it can really kind of just crumple you in on yourself. You can almost feel the effects physically. So I found that fascinating, and as I thought about that, particularly in terms of the contrast between that and what we read in the Bible about how God has created us and made us for connection, for relationship. I just thought that that's really profound, that what you see in this instance of people being forcibly isolated from each other actually rings true to the opposite of what the Bible says about how we're created.
Which is now. Tell us the steps that you went through then. You were going to be preaching on Proverbs 25, and you continue to preach on Proverbs 25. How were you thinking that Proverbs 25 connected in with that issue?
Well, the whole chapter has a really interesting kind of flow, and the chapter's really it starts with the notion of actually authority and control, and so it starts with God and His control of everything. And the fact that because He alone is in charge of everything in the world, He has the prerogative to reveal things and make things known and accessible, but also to hold things back and conceal them. But then you get this really interesting flow that there's a connection between God and the king as the highest human authority in the land, and particularly in God's kingdom. And then under the king you have the king's officials. But as you read the beginning of Proverbs chapter 25, the authority and responsibility that the king and his officials have is to create a kingdom of righteousness. That's the term that the passage uses. And I think that got me starting to think about what is the vision of life under God's rule that these verses are casting. And when you think about the biblical language of righteousness, it's more than, I guess, we usually think of righteousness in terms of maybe right rules to live by, or even sort of in right relationship. And that's absolutely true, but I think when you read the biblical stuff around the language of righteousness, it's actually more those things are meant to foster or frame, create a sort of a stable basis for people to be able to give and receive good from each other and love from each other. And so the reason why you read so much insistence on righteousness in the Bible is because that is actually the foundation and framework for love, for giving ourselves to each other. And that's really kind of built into who we are and how we're meant to operate.
Okay.
So that's where it starts.
Yeah, that's right. So how then do we connect? This is a real problem that we have now, isn't it?
Yeah,
because if we were living in times that were not like this, I guess we'd say, okay, well, what we need to do is we need to be connected and we need to be loving each other on the basis of this righteousness.
Yeah, that's right.
But in the current situation, how do we connect those things together?
I think it's really fascinating. And I think for me it was really helpful then to think about, again, who are we? We're not just mental or even emotional beings, we're physical beings. And so I think ideally the vision of connectedness and relationship in the Bible is sort of our whole persons coming together and using every part of our beings, our minds, our actions, our resources and our bodies to actually connect and do good to each other. And that's why, when you're with people that you really love, when you're held away from them for a long time, you feel that kind of loss. You want to actually be close to them, not only emotionally and through your activities, but actually physically. And so I guess if you start by thinking that's kind of what we want to try and achieve, if there are barriers in the way, some through necessity, others through, I guess just our selfishness, the first step is to think, okay, how can I actually take those into account, but keep on pushing towards that? How can I connect with people well? And if that's the vision, and these are the blocks in the way, what can we do to kind of overcome them, work around them, or work with them to keep on connecting as much as we can?
You had some practical ideas to do that. What were some of your practical?
Well, I'm just getting started, and as I think through, moving from the ideal and the concept of it to actually what does it mean, it's actually been really tricky because how do you offer physical connection when you can't offer physical connection? That's really the thing that we're trying to work around. But I found one helpful resource on the on social media was someone had come up with a really simple card, and it just had some basic contact details, and some check boxes particularly for those who are at the moment self-isolated or unable to take part in what remains of our social life together, and just offering, can I help you in a way? Can I drop off some groceries? Can I pick up, a parcel or anything that you need, or even just a friendly phone call? And so I think that's a really practical way. Speaking of other suggestions, Lon, I really enjoyed what you did last night in terms of I guess videoing you having dinner with your family. And not only was it just really nice to see how the Windsor family works and get an insight into some of your personalities, but it was, I guess, again, a way of saying, look, if we can't actually physically be together, what approximation, simulation can we provide that at least gives you a little taste of it? And so, I thought that was a really interesting way to come at it, but a really helpful one, because you're trying to give us as much of a sense of intimate connection and physical connection as you can. And so I find those sorts of things really helpful.
No, thanks, Dan. That was a response to your sermon. Actually, I was thinking, how do we do this? And we were thinking through all these issues. This week has been crazy for everyone, and will continue to be. But I recall sitting at, we were sitting in our faculty meeting at we had a breakfast on Monday morning. And we kind of had sort of two meetings back to back. And in the first meeting, we were talking about how important it is, especially for theological education, to have that togetherness, to be eating together, to be having classes together, to actually be, full-time on site, together. And then we switched to, okay, how are we going to be able to deal with the fact that that's not actually going to happen? So there was that, and there was your sermon, which just made me think, okay, I'm thinking we need to be loving people. And I was also thinking about some of the responses to, say, plagues and that sort of thing in the past that Christians have made, where they've actually made that physical contact at danger to themselves. And I think that's not necessarily what we need to be doing now, because it's not, because, it's, if we make that physical contact, we could be a danger to others.
That's right.
And actually, in many ways, it's not true for everyone, but in many ways, many people in our society have you know, they've got enough, many of them have enough toilet paper, but they don't necessarily have, they've got that loneliness and that isolation.
Yeah.
And I was actually reflecting, what can we do to love? And I know that, you know, in the past, my use of online kind of social media, I really don't like just sort of putting myself out there, because you can be attacked and all sorts of things can happen. And I don't necessarily like putting my family out there as well, because you know, I want to kind of protect them. Yeah. But I figured, well, our family's at a point where they're probably strong enough. Yeah. And we can actually take that risk, and it is a risk.
That's right.
Just to invite people in and just to go, look, just share this meal with us, and we're going to keep doing it. I think the family wants to do it, at least for the next little while. But it's actually, it is a way of loving people. And for us, it's kind of, you know, I'd just like to climb into my little hole and just not do that in some ways. Yeah. But it's a way of loving people in response to the sermon.
Yeah, that's right.
It's just one way of doing it. There's got to be lots of other ways of doing it. And our Moore College mission is we're completely revisioning this Moore College mission. We were going to go and spend time with churches. Now we're thinking, how do we create connections, opportunities for the gospel, opportunities to speak the truth in love, I guess. And those opportunities for love as well as speaking the truth.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, thanks very much for your sermon.
Oh, no worries.
But for your reflection, we're all in this together. I mean, we're all here. You know, right now we're keeping a bit of an appropriate social distance. I'm not sure what the particular rules about framing in a video is, but as you can notice, we're sort of a bit further apart than you might otherwise be. You know, and you're probably meant to be closer, but we're doing that a little bit. But we're also encouraging each other, encouraging the students, and encouraging everyone. And if you're listening, and you know you're one of the ministers of a church who right now we just heard the news that churches pretty much cancelled in the Diocese of Sydney. So thinking those kind of things through, how can we love people? How can we approximate the proximity?
Yeah, that's right. I think that'll be really important for us to do in the next little while. And I think, you know, of all people, we should understand the importance of that the most, because we know the God who reached out to us and drew himself to us in love in Christ and gave up everything really to come near to us. And so as much as possible, we want to model that and to reflect that love of Jesus in coming to us, dying on the cross for our sins, in the way that we treat others. And you know, one of the things I was reflecting on, which I forgot to put in the sermon, was that we're all just making up as we go along, aren't we? It was a sermon written sort of in the few hours before I came. But there's that passage in the Gospels which you know, I've read so many times, but I haven't really reflected on deeply. But this situation has, I think, brought home the importance to me of where Jesus says, you know, even giving a cup of cold water to one of the least of these of mine, you know, you're doing it to me. And I think if we understand that in terms of that Jesus' people have been saved and loved by him, then actually as we extend ourselves to others, we are actually taking part in him serving the world. And as you alluded to in what I said about the early Christians, it was actually that extension of care when, you know, self-preservation tells you to run away, the Christian state. And even though for us that physical staying may not be possible or desirable, I think if we can think in every other way, how can I be around people, how can I be serving people and immediate to people, that is a powerful witness to why would you do that? Well, it's because my God served and loved me like that. And so it could be a really powerful way to open up the message of Jesus to our world in this situation.
Yeah, absolutely. The rules are changing around us, aren't they? But the principles are staying the same. So we need to be very creative about how we do all this. Well, thanks very much, Dan. I think your sermon's available online if anyone wants to actually listen to it. You just go to the Moore College website and look up the sermons, and you should be able to find it. Look up resources there. And I was talking about the sort of dinner thing that I'm doing. This is the I'm speaking on the same channel, so you can follow the channel if you want to look at it and subscribe or whatever. Okay. Thanks very much, Dan.
All right. Thanks a lot.